Good day, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. Average Folks in the Afterlife, number 30. And we are back to Jürgen Zhu's marvelous Vistas of Infinity. And in the latter sections of the book, he explores the higher reaches of heaven, the higher astral planes, the higher vibratory areas that not everyone gets to, and if they do, they don't always remember. That's one of my glaring faults, I must say, and something I have to practice myself. When one gets to these higher vibratory levels, one's regular reference points, such as I'm here, I stop here, that's there, self another, notions of how things are created, or are they spontaneously created by thought second by second, or are you entering a consensus reality which was created long before you got there? And if it was long before you got there, was another version of you that helped create it in the first place? Well, these and many other questions will tire the tireless explorer, but not so Jürgen. And that's the great value of his work. So in a chapter called The Gates of Higher Consciousness, let us plunge in. I was on the verge of dropping into a sleep-like trance, but something jerked me into full waking awareness, though it was not physical. Consciousness. I observed passively new vistas passing in front of my vision. Incredibly complex patterns created an astonishing array of arches through which I began to travel. The scenes I passed through were continuously evolving, and at every moment and every turn I found staggeringly new forms and manifestations which simply came from another world. I travelled through tunnels made out of complex fractals, patterns which revealed themselves to be the most natural way of consciousness manifesting its creation. With their deceptive complexity yet utter simplicity of unfolding, they allowed for infinite varieties of manifestations. As they evolved, not only did they reveal new detail, but also conjured up incredible powers in order to create vast and staggeringly beautiful monuments, which grew and unfolded in breathtaking glory and diversity. For a moment I pondered what it would be like to get lost in these magical labyrinths, so beautiful and so fantastic in their ever-changing promise of adventure, that it would be close to impossible to ever find your way out again. I then saw that the visual vistas that spun out in front of me, however glorious and rich and however magnificent their beauty, were little more than a trap for the senses and attention to keep me away from the place where I truly belonged. Instantly I recalled the stillness, the silent companion who had been waiting patiently for me to remember. What I had seen was little more than a movie screen. As I resisted the labyrinth of form, I was rewarded with a powerful wave of love rolling towards me. I began feeling pressure on my forehead and calmly reasoned that it was energy rising and settling into a cold, burning fire. I was ignited and instantly surrendered to the wave of love. The image in front of me began to change. Where I had witnessed the turbulence of ever-evolving thought forms, there was now laid out in front of me the most heavenly garden. Whereas before I had been a detached observer, this time I was personally invited into enchanted grand parks, elaborately designed with paisley curls of flower beds, promising the joyful wonders yet to unfold. I was taken, mind, body, and soul, towards an elaborate gate, shrouded in glowing mists, fashioned from gold, orange and amber stones and metals. It was pinned into a glorious golden sky that had no horizon. Here I was, standing in front of the most sublime archetype, so often reported by people who had crossed the borderlands of death, Heaven's Gate. A cliched symbol, and yet, in anything I had ever seen before in my life, this was more and promised to be another pinnacle. I could spend a fair amount of words in an attempt to do justice to its glory and magnificence, but the core significance of this great symbol was the realization that I was just about to enter my true home, the place where I was born and where I had sprung from. That it was time to depart from a world defined by opposites and separation and become reunited with a long-lost love in sacred ecstasy. I abandoned all thought, just as a pilgrim might abandon his belongings and shoes in order to enter a holy shrine. I was there in my entirety as the gate opened and I entered on a wave of joy, which swiftly became my driving force. It did not last. My guide had not reached me, nor was I ready. Thoughts which I deemed long abandoned clasped themselves around my heels and abandoned my joys. I was pulled back into the labyrinth of time, where one event followed another. The space around me began to fade and turned into a vision only, and then I sat back in my chair. But this was okay. I noticed that I had not been divorced at all from the reality of my essence, only from another form of presentation, and where I was sitting now was glorious reality too, in all its boundless peace. My mind detached from thought, I was still and free. I had moved into the place of my free choosing, where I could partake of the offerings of my innermost secrets too. For an hour I rested in my chair, contemplating the big questions of existence and the mechanics of thought, how they were made and what they were made of. At these shores of time, I watched effortlessly their waves, their interaction, their mounting crests, the joyous delivery of treasures they brought ashore from the ocean's depth, and every wave delivered new wealth. That was the experience, one of them. And I think it would do well to quote some of Jürgen's post-experience thoughts. We have to bear in mind that consciousness is vastly expanded in such moments and encompasses a non-linear awareness, which is hard to describe once confined again to the prison walls of our brains. When scientists and philosophers grapple with intellectual problems, they mostly do so by employing linear thinking. One thought follows the next one. Ideas are lined up like beads on a necklace, pitted against each other, logical conclusions following into openings of new pathways for further thinking. All the while, the neural network of the brain is working overtime, streamlining the grooves, becoming more efficient, faster, more productive. Occasionally, whole areas light up, resulting in spontaneous epiphanies. This is not how the non-physical cognitive apparatus works. Here, everything happens in non-linear ways at once, via knowing rather than thinking. There is no time delay, just a connection performed spontaneously, programmed by the tapestry of the inner person. That doesn't make us into nuclear physicists because it very much relies on what we are and our individual program, but within the program we have spontaneous access to all information relevant to us. So, for example, we can follow a line that connects us to a former life, and this life will be accessed at once and in full high definition. We are still individuals and our higher status does not change this. These heavenly vistas are also populous with such individuals, just as our world is here. We are like bees clinging to honeycomb, congregating in cities and communities, just as we do on every lower level of physical and non-physical reality. Whereas on Earth we socialize and interact mainly for survival, on these higher levels we interact motivated by aesthetics, interests and cognition. Our cities revolve around thoughts, ideas, our fascinations and the arts. Here is a short report. Life experienced as a tapestry. When I am fortunate enough to be drawn into the ego-free zone of these sublime levels, it always feels like a new and first experience, and every time I am struck by how rich, multidimensional, and incomprehensibly infinite reality really is. This applies to the astral regions as well, of course, but here the slightest shift of attention can draw me into a radically different type of awareness. Setting aside the impact on the accompanying emotional states of bliss and all-present joy of being liberated and yet residing within the secure feeling of shelter where nothing can harm one, I am confronted with unlimited possibilities of perception, experience, and exploration, which makes every moment a new discovery and realization. To give an example, when posing a question such as, "Where does the ego come from?" I am presented not only with an answer, but with a clear graphic multimedia presentation. With the question posed, I was instantly thrown into a vast network of intricate patterns, each element connected to its neighbours. The further I rose away from it, the more I perceived it as one huge and intricate tapestry, made out of billions of its individual components. But the moment I closed into one individual component, I found myself positioned at the epicenter of the universe, from which all the pattern radiated out. The realization was that wherever I placed my attention became the epicenter of the universe, and that did just not apply to individual people, but to everything in existence, from any object to every atom and every living thing. I heartily agree. At any one point, everything radiates out into infinity, giving the impression that every point I focus on and then out from instantly becomes the very center of the universe. This is why every person on earth considers themselves to be unique and the most important person, fashioning the ego identity from this perception and the history of experiences focused on it. Here's another journal entry offering a novel perspective of myself, which reveals a personal history where I observed my own and very particular aspect of my individual section of the network in close-up. Until then, I had been completely unaware of it. It showed me a comprehensive blueprint of who and what I was and am. This single experience happened on 2 consecutive days, and to me at least, it shows there is consistency within non-physical reality. Until very recently, I've hardly ever tried meditation lying down on my back, for the simple reason that it is just too easy to fall asleep. One afternoon, while resting on my bed, I noticed how quickly I was able to sink into a very deep surrendered state, entering a kind of trance without actually falling asleep. During this trance state, I was acutely aware of having totally surrendered to the presence of love, which had been with me all day since getting up in the morning. This underlying aspect of reality has been with me for a while now, which I often perceive as an actual presence, and which I refer to as my silent companion. This will be examined more closely later. During my lying down meditation on 7 May 2012, this feeling was very intense, almost like an in-love type sensation, but on a much higher and more elevated level. It was a feeling that appeared to have no bounds. Eventually, I drifted into a deep and wholesome slumber. When I woke up 2 hours later, I had a very painful, strained, and stiff neck, having rested awkwardly in a twisted position. I was unable to move my head in any direction without pain. This totally overshadowed and finally obliterated any of the sublime memories of my afternoon nap. To take my mind off the discomfort, I tried to get into the least painful position in my chair and then started browsing on my iPad for reports on near-death experiences found on various websites. I searched under the keyword cities in order to see if I could find reports that would confirm or were close to my own experiences. Although some of the reports were sketchily written, they nevertheless catapulted my illustrator mindset into action and supplied some sublime inner visions, which allowed me to flesh out the scant description. Very soon in my mind's eye, every scene was described, however sketchily, and it was turned into a vivid landscape and sceneries that were begging to be manifested on my computer screen as attractive images. But I was tired, and taking a couple of painkillers, I decided to call it a day. No sooner had I dropped off to sleep when, in my dream, I was surrounded by the landscapes I had imagined so vividly only minutes before. But this was not all. It gradually dawned on me that this was not an ordinary dream, but a lucid one. The jolt of this realization brought instant clarity. I had an out-of-body experience where I suddenly saw myself as I'd never seen my body before, if I can call it a body, because what I perceived was a large stretched-out tapestry in front of my vision that I identified as the totality of myself and what I consisted of. It unveiled why and how I had turned into what I was, including all the unexplored potentials that were still to be realized. It was radiating out from a centre with many other centres on the peripheries, which in themselves formed mini centres from which in turn other patterns radiated out and connected with intricate and detailed designs like an elaborately crafted quilt. I was no longer the physical bag made out of muscle tissue and bones, but a living organism made out of complex and multi-layered systems of energy, which configured itself into a fascinating conglomeration of radiant beauty and strangely symmetric perfection. Every detail of this was a work of art that nature had created around that awareness, which called itself me. I now recognize this because it was laid out in front of me as a fascinating design of complex patterns. I had become a system rather than a person. I was a work of engineering and crafting, with each constituent part having evolved and refined over time as a result of varied interactions with the environment and other similar systems like mine. I was a complex machine made out of millions of finely tuned parts so it could function as an intricate unit and tie as smoothly and with as little friction as possible into a much bigger machine which stretched from horizon to horizon in 3 dimensions, filling all space as far as the eye could see. There were darker and lighter patches, exuberant ones and fillers, areas that were not clearly defined or developed, but it was all needed to complete the whole. When moving further away, I found to my utter amazement that I was connected to other equally beautiful patterns made out of the same stuff, marvelously intricate and unique in their configurations, which in turn were connected to others, until the whole creation of nature's magnificence came into view as a cosmic net of astounding proportions. But there was more. This current aspect of the tapestry of mind was not the only one. My attention switched easily to another layer of existence, which from our temporal viewpoint could be interpreted as a past life. But this too was a relevant aspect of the whole. When I zoomed in, I found myself no longer on this familiar planet of ours. My attention was suddenly located on an alien world, and not just in the form of a single life there, but many, and each one completely different from the other. New identities, new manifestations formed around it, and surprising connections and a very unusual experience. Each detail was simply another part of this gigantic tapestry that was me. In one such life, I was wearing strange garments and handling a mysterious rock. The effect of holding the rock for any length of time was that it rendered me invisible, although only briefly. Then my attention shifted to another scene. This time war was tearing civilizations apart in another life so strange and alien I was struggling to put it in any context at all. Throughout all of this, one thing was absolutely certain. It was the same me, my essential feeling of self, my Jurgenness. That was consistent, except that I was always dressed in another life, in other appearances, and in an alien, distant world with its alien environments and customs. Another scene appeared the moment my eyes were drawn not far from this centre and into a neighbouring one. This time I was a geologist, explorer, or perhaps a miner, and part of a group of 6 people. We had entered a gigantic iceberg or soft crystal via a massive cave. The inside was lit by a mellow light emitted by a crystal itself. Our group split up and started working on various parts of the cave. Buried just beneath the surface of the soft crystal rock were various changing hues of light. By carefully scraping the surface, living images emerged. That is the nearest I can reference it, because there is nothing within my present vocabulary that is able to accurately describe what I saw. What the exact nature of these 3 images were, or their purpose. We appeared to be mining for life forms, which totally defied anything I'd ever known, and yet it made complete sense. All of this was happening within my being as an infinite self, the quintessence of my Jurgenness tapestry, which in its essence was a vast and intimately connected to something vaster still. This was also me the moment I perceived the whole and then understood why love and compassion was such a natural linking aspect towards all these life forms that I was connected part of. That I was a connected part of. Looking at myself in this context, I was both insignificant and humble, while at the same time awesome and majestic. It was when I became aware of this greater me that another dimension opened and light came rushing in. Or should I say, the light came rushing out. I had seen manifestation and now became aware of the brilliant essence that manifested it. It had been there while I was observing and studying it, and had been subtly tugging at me to prise me off my fascination with its lower aspect, as if to say, "Come on, let's go. This is not the true reality of what you are." Then I was consumed by a billowing cloud of light, gone or perhaps absorbed, I could not tell. A moment later I became aware of my physical body here in a physical reality needing the bathroom. I opened my eyes, sat up on the edge of the bed, and instantly felt the sharp pain in my neck. I moved my hand across it. My hand was a curious object, a divine hand that felt unattached, made of light, and as I touched my physical skin, the pain dissolved. I stood up and moved my head slowly from side to side, then in a circular motion. There was no pain. But there was also not me as a physical body. The one that had arisen from the bed and wanted to go to the bathroom was an unlimited source of light. A nebula of light, or perhaps a massive sun, so great that it contained the whole universe. It was light from the fine strands of its hair to the tips of its noses, in this flesh. My consciousness had changed very little from where I had been only moments earlier. I was still just as lucid in an awareness that stretched everywhere and left no atom in this vast universe of mine untouched. Wherever I directed my attention, a great wave of incredible love rolled towards it and illuminated the spot surrounding it. In one moment I understood what real blessing means and the incredible healing power of love. I thought of various places on earth and my attention would roll towards them like a juggernaut of light and spread light for miles around. With a jolt I realized that I was who I was meant to be all my life, and that from now on I would be unable to be anything else. After I came back from the bathroom, I went back to bed and sank into a deep and wholesome sleep. When I woke up, I was fully back in my body, my old self completely restored, and plunged back into its accustomed state of unawareness, the one that was trying, day by day, to incorporate a deeper knowledge in its life, yet was only able, despite all its valiant efforts, to carry a faint reflection of its bigger self. I was reduced back into mundane existence, all the wonders of my radiant self withdrawn from this modest physical heap of my body. Was it all a dream? All the tangible evidence that I had brought back was that my pain in my neck had gone for good, but I was my old and ordinary self again. Yes, I can certainly identify with some of those words. Coming back from a transcendent experience of oneness to this world of one foot after another. And a body dense and heavy to gravity. It's a challenge, no question. And more. And another experience. I had total recall of being part of a mining operation that actually sourced this strange type of mineral that had the side effect of rendering people temporarily invisible if they came into physical contact with it. When the effect subsided, the body was restored to normal. It was also used for healing, but its main application was in engineering because of its ability to dissolve inorganic matter completely without leaving any waste behind. I observed lots of other unique aspects of this planet. The civilization was clearly highly advanced. There was a powerful sense of community with no conflict among the people. All efforts and energies were used to promote science, the arts, and culture to create a paradisical environment based on harmony, cooperation, and solidarity. I felt a powerful connection with the people in every aspect of this world. It had been my home planet at one stage, and I felt a powerfully strong attachment. Then the life sequences on this planet came to an end. But now, finally, after millennia had passed, I visited the planet again. I remember a long, enjoyable journey through space, at first following an Earth satellite, then traveling through space in beautiful nebula, past suns and stars, until I eventually arrived on my home planet. This time it was an ice desert. There were no people, but it was still beautiful. It was covered in snow and beautiful crystals, some looking like flowers arranged in intricate fractal tapestries, all glistening in stunning glory like under a bright sun. Suddenly I became extremely sad as I clearly identified it as my home planet that had been deserted and all my people had gone. I knew then I had lost my home forever and I would never return. When I got up the next morning, I was extremely depressed. When I made my tea, the tears streamed down my face, and I was glad nobody saw me. The feeling of homesickness was overwhelming, so powerful that I sank deeper into depression. I tried to meditate, but was unable, and the sadness was almost unbearable. And later, whatever the interpretation you may have, although the feeling of sadness had erased during the day, I was not fully convinced by the analytical take on my experience. That's a kind of a psychotherapeutic analysis by his wife, Julia, who is a psychotherapist. However, I will have to accept that consciousness is unfathomable and may have many parallels. The things we experience are reflected on many layers of reality, which simply demonstrate how truly great and mysterious consciousness is. But whenever I think of the event, the feeling of homesickness still comes back to me, even now. Indeed, I've come across that several times, both in the literature of past life regression and my own counseling work. Souls who don't feel that attached to this planet Earth, but a deep homesickness for other planets or planetary systems that they left in order to have experience here. And I believe I did that myself. Many thousands of years ago, monads were invited to come and, monads ourselves, to populate this new planet Earth. And the parameters of existence which would be tougher than other planets. High density, lower connection to personal divinity, high levels of fear and anxiety, polarities, self and other, the whole 9 yards. And because many of the other planets that we came from were a little more harmonious and easier to get along with than this one, this is the school of hard knocks. And I believe that is the reason that some, not many, feel a great homesickness for their more beautiful and harmonious planetary homes. That is also the case with the astral plane and the spirit planes, which we come from before we're born and which we go to when we pass. We have an instinctive understanding deep in our psyches that is a world of great beauty, harmony, and peace and joy. And when we come here, especially the children, young children and teenagers who get incredibly upset at the sheer nastiness of much of the interaction on the planet, either get terribly idealistic and want to reform this world, or terribly depressed and take care of their physical selves and disappear back to the spirit world. That is the reason. It's all part of the game, but I think it's important to emphasize that point. I look around and I see many young people in great pain because they cannot cope with the great challenges of the physical plane of this planet. But unfortunately, that is why we're here. There's no easy way around it. There are ways through it, but no easy ways around it. You have to put your head down and charge through and be tough. And many of us can't seem to do that. When you look at the World Health Organization numbers of suicides per year on the planet, it's hundreds of thousands. It's shocking. Much, much worse than, warfare and car accidents and yada, yada, yada. Way, way beyond. And I don't see it as a problem to be addressed particularly. It's just something to live with. It's the school of hard knocks, and some people want out early. Of course, they come back and try a little harder next time. And with those cheery little words, we'll end this session. And there is certainly more fabulous stuff from Vistas of Infinity. And we'll get back to it very soon, I promise. Until then, on this extremely hot October day here in Ontario, I am this close to turning on the air conditioning. It is so hot. Goodbye to you all.